Everyone believed that the tycoon's only son had been born without sight. No one ever raised a doubt. Not the doctors who signed the reports, not the staff who served in the mansion, not even the father himself. For years, the boy's condition was accepted as fact. He was kept apart from the noise of the world, hidden inside a vast estate where silence was the rule. His days passed in rigid routines until one afternoon, a new face entered the household. She wasn't a doctor. She wasn't a specialist. She was simply someone who noticed what others overlooked. If you believe that one careful glance can transform a life, then stay with this story, because everything begins here. The Harrington estate stretched across a row of maple trees at the edge of the lake. Its glass front shone like a mirror, cold and impersonal against the pale sky. Inside, everything carried an air of wealth but not warmth: dark polished wood, heavy carpets, leather armchairs without a crease. The whole house looked untouched, almost like a museum, where beauty was preserved but life was absent. Time itself seemed divided by clocks and schedules. Breakfast at 7:30. Therapy at 9. Quiet hours at 2. Story time at 8:30. Each tick of the clock boxed life into rigid squares, yet within that order was a hollowness no one dared to speak of. 8-year-old Daniel Harrington sat in the same window chair every single day. His eyes were open but never focused, his posture almost identical from one day to the next, as if he had been pressed into the furniture. His father, William Harrington, a man of 43, built his fortune in agribusiness and controlled supply chains with a handshake so firm it unsettled boardrooms. But at home, especially in the evenings, William was just a worn-out man with streaks of silver in his hair and a heaviness in his walk, dragging invisible weights that no fortune could lift. The year Daniel was born was also the year tragedy struck. His mother, Clara, died in a helicopter accident. The nursery she had designed was left untouched. Pastel walls with animal decals, a rocking chair beside the crib, soft curtains that never swayed again. William never changed a thing, as if even moving a cushion would betray her memory. Daniel rarely spoke. On the few occasions William read him a story, the boy tilted his head ever so slightly. When music played faintly in the background, sometimes his brow twitched. Tiny movements so small that most people missed them. To William they were fragile threads of hope, too thin to hold on to, yet impossible to let go of. Doctors, specialists, therapists, they all came and went. Reports stacked up in drawers, full of complex terms that never seemed to lead anywhere. The boy's silence stood tall like a wall, unbroken. The house staff was small and discreet. Mrs. Collins, the sharp-eyed housekeeper, Mark the gardener and handyman, and Rosa, the cheerful cook. They followed a silent code: keep Daniel safe, walk softly, never change routines unless ordered by a doctor. Every morning one ritual repeated without fail. A vial of eye drops was delivered to Daniel's room, administered carefully, then marked on the calendar. Few questioned its purpose. The bottle carried the label of the family's trusted physician, Dr. Adrian Monroe, who had been there since Daniel's birth. Then came the day Evelyn Carter arrived for an interview. William himself opened the door. Evelyn, 28, stood tall with calm eyes, a dark blouse pressed neatly, her voice steady but quiet. She didn't smile unnecessarily, nor did she chatter to fill silence. She simply showed up, fully present. Her resume was modest: some years of domestic work, hotel housekeeping, basic references. On paper nothing stood out. Yet William, who had dismissed dozens of polished candidates, lingered as he studied her. "I lost my child not long ago," Evelyn admitted softly. William asked no more. Grief recognized grief. He gave a short nod and the tour began. The Harrington mansion unfolded before her, the glass cabinets polished spotless, the hallways lined with modern art. When William announced, "Evelyn will be on a 1-month trial," Mrs. Collins froze for half a second. Her expression wasn't openly harsh, but the unspoken question lingered. Why her? In places of wealth, prejudice often walks quietly, leaving heavy footsteps without sound. Evelyn, however, did not flinch. She didn't argue, didn't justify herself. She simply observed, memorizing the household's rhythm of silence, careful not to disturb it. During her first break, Evelyn spotted Daniel at his usual place by the wide window, clutching an old teddy bear. His face was so still he resembled a sculpture. She didn't approach. Instead, she sat several feet away, opened her lunchbox, and let the silence of the house settle around her. The autumn breeze slipped through a tiny gap at the door frame and the curtain shifted. For the first time, Daniel's head tilted faintly toward the light. The movement was small, barely there. But to Evelyn, who carried her own grief, it was enough to spark a question. Did he sense it? That evening after she cleaned, William asked, "How was your first day?" "Quiet," Evelyn answered. But even silence has rhythm. She didn't make promises or offer miracles. She simply asked for time. "I'm not here to replace anyone. I only want to be here in the least disruptive way." William stood in the hall, silent for a long while. Trust was hard for him, too much like a burden. But something about her steadiness shifted one small corner of the house's atmosphere. From that night on, another pair of watchful eyes began to walk the halls. In her early days, Evelyn moved quietly as if she had always belonged there. She learned the language of the house, how the mop glided without squeaks, how curtains had to be drawn at a perfect angle to avoid sudden movements. Here, mistakes weren't about dust or stains. They were about noise, about disruption. Evelyn built an invisible notebook in her mind. She noted that sudden sounds made Daniel's face tighten. Gradual changes in light made him tilt his head. Soon she realized that what the staff called safety was really an excuse to avoid trying anything new. Daniel's world had been reduced to near zero stimulation. That meant no one truly knew what he might respond to. Evelyn, shaped by her own loss, believed in small signals. She called her method one variable at a time. Don't overwhelm, don't flood him with noise, but gently change one thing, wait and see if he responds. On her third day, as she folded laundry near Daniel's room, she heard a faint hum. Not music, not words, just a soft attempt at sound. She didn't rush in, didn't interrupt. Instead, she moved her chair a little closer to the doorway, making her presence known without invading his space. Moments later, Daniel walked slowly toward the door, one hand stretched as though tracing the air. Evelyn extended her hand halfway, palm open. He touched her fingertip, paused, then pulled back. 5 seconds, 10 seconds. Enough to know someone was there, someone safe. From then on, Evelyn stayed steady, letting small moments accumulate. She began experimenting with light, drawing the curtains slightly to let sunshine spill into the room without startling him. Daniel's head turned almost imperceptibly toward the light. She didn't rush to label it sight. She simply called it response to brightness. She also noticed the eye drop routine. Every morning at the exact time the drops were given. Each time afterward, Daniel's responses to light seemed weaker. Evelyn didn't make assumptions yet, but she wrote it down. She built a quiet record in a small notebook. Times, responses, changes. If something repeated, it meant a pattern was there. At the end of her first week, William caught her in the hallway. "It's been so long," he sighed. "I don't know what's real anymore." Evelyn's reply was calm. "We can rely on what repeats." For the first time in years, William felt he was hearing not just comfort but clarity. And from that single moment, a different story began. One where silence might not be the end, but only the waiting room for light. The days passed slowly, yet something in the Harrington mansion had changed. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was subtle, like a chair moved half an inch or a curtain folded at a slightly different angle. The house remained quiet, but the silence no longer felt empty. Evelyn had joined the rhythm, blending into the background without forcing herself forward. She had learned the sounds of the estate the way others might memorize a piece of music. The soft roll of the mop on wooden floors, the bristles of the broom against baseboards, the whisper of curtains being drawn, each sound mattered. Here, even the smallest disturbance felt like a storm. Evelyn respected that. She moved with care, not because she feared mistakes, but because she knew suddenness could close Daniel off even further. But she also knew silence could become a trap. For years, the staff had tiptoed so carefully around the boy that his world shrank smaller and smaller, until it was nearly nothing. They called it safety. To Evelyn it looked like surrender. Without change, there was no way to know what Daniel was capable of. She began quietly. A note here, an observation there. If a sound startled him, she logged it. If light made him tilt his head, she wrote it down. She wasn't trying to force miracles. She was simply searching for repetition, the kind of evidence that no one could deny. On the third afternoon of her trial, Evelyn sat folding sheets just outside Daniel's room. Through the thin crack of the door, she heard something faint. A hum. It wasn't music, not even a full tone, more like a child testing the edges of his voice. Her first instinct was to rush in, to encourage, to celebrate. But she didn't. Instead, she slid her chair slightly closer, just enough to let him know someone was there without crowding him. Moments later, Daniel appeared at the doorway. His hand hovered in the air, searching the space. Evelyn didn't call his name. She simply extended her own hand halfway between them. Daniel's small fingers brushed hers for a moment, then pulled back. It wasn't long, but it was enough. He had reached out. He had chosen contact. Mrs. Collins passed by just then, setting down a tray a little louder than necessary. Her eyes flicked toward Evelyn, not cruel but heavy with doubt. Evelyn gave her a quiet smile, no defense, no explanation. She had nothing to prove, only consistency to offer. The next day, Evelyn tested light. She pulled the curtain 1/3 open, careful not to make the metal rod scrape. Sunlight spilled gently across the wall. Daniel stopped humming, his head turning slightly toward the patch of brightness. Evelyn stood perfectly still, her breath steady. She counted slowly to measure the length of his response. She didn't call it seeing. That word was too loaded, too dangerous. She only noted, responded to light change. Later that afternoon, while dusting the bookshelf, her cloth slipped and fell to the carpet with a small thud. Daniel's brow twitched at the sound. Evelyn whispered a soft, sorry, not as a polite gesture but as an acknowledgement that in their shared space, responsibility mattered. A few seconds later, Daniel hummed again, this time a sharper, higher note. Two senses now, light and sound, had drawn reactions. That night, she opened her small notebook and wrote the times and details in neat lines. 9:15 a.m. curtain opened 1/3. Head tilt toward light. 12:10 p.m. humming continued in hallway. 3:40 p.m. cloth dropped softly. Brow twitch. The notes weren't proof yet, but they were beginnings. Something happened once, it could be luck. If it happened twice, it was a pattern. She also noticed the eye drops more carefully. Every morning, 7:45 sharp, Rosa placed the vial on a tray. At 8 o'clock, Mrs. Collins carried it in. By 8:05, the faint click of the cap echoed down the hall. At 8:06, a mark was made on the wall calendar. Each time afterward, Daniel seemed more distant, less responsive. Evelyn didn't say anything out loud. She wasn't ready to accuse. But she underlined those entries in her notes. On Thursday evening, William watched her from the hallway as she tidied up. At the far end of the corridor, Daniel sat as usual by the window. William's voice was low, almost tired. It's been so long. I don't know what's real anymore. Evelyn closed her notebook gently. We can rely on what repeats, she answered. Then she explained her approach. Change one thing at a time. Repeat until you rule out coincidence. Record it all, whether the outcome looked good or bad. William didn't reply immediately. He had heard endless technical words from experts, theories that never held up. But this was steady, ordinary, testable within his own walls. For the first time in years, he felt like there might be ground beneath his feet. But outside their quiet corner, subtle tensions kept moving. The gate guard asked Evelyn's name twice as if making sure she belonged. The florist delivery man explained instructions to her more carefully than necessary, almost condescendingly. Even Mark, kind in his own way, over-explained how to reset a fuse box, as though assuming she couldn't understand. Evelyn absorbed it all. She didn't fight back with words. She saved her energy for Daniel. Because she had learned something important. Even pressure, even expectations could make silence retreat. Patience was her tool. Waiting, recording, letting moments grow without rushing them. On Friday night, she sat near the wide window while Daniel leaned against the frame, his face tilted toward the moonlight. The room was half shadow, half glow. Evelyn said nothing. She only watched. Then Daniel lifted his face a little higher as if listening, not to sound but to the faint rhythm of light. Not sight but not nothing either. Evelyn didn't cry. She closed her notebook and wrote one simple line: light has rhythm. The road ahead would bring harder questions. Medication, confrontation, maybe even battles far beyond the mansion walls. But that night something had shifted. The great Harrington mansion, once frozen in silence, was a fraction warmer. All because one woman chose to sit quietly and count the rhythm of light with a child. The following morning began like every other day inside the Harrington estate. The alarm bell chimed at its usual time, the staff moved with careful precision, and Daniel sat in his familiar chair by the wide window, teddy bear pressed against his chest. To an outsider, nothing had changed. Yet for Evelyn, every movement, every glance, every breath mattered. She had begun to see details others dismissed as meaningless. She rose early, slipping quietly through the hallway before the household fully stirred. She opened the curtains just as she had done the day before, 1/3 of the way, letting in a slant of pale light across the floor. Daniel sat in his chair, his posture as still as always, but as the beam crept across the carpet, his head tilted slightly toward it. Evelyn counted silently to 8, then closed the curtain just a little so the brightness would not vanish all at once. No words passed between them, only time. A second rhythm now existed, one just for the two of them. At exactly 8:55 Mrs. Collins' heels clicked sharply across the hall. At 9 o'clock the therapy schedule on the wall clicked to mark the hour. The mansion's strict order pressed on, but Evelyn had her own timetable. She had found the quiet pockets between routines, moments when the vacuum cleaner wasn't humming, when the kitchen fan wasn't rattling, when the wind outside was still. These were the spaces she used for her experiments. That day at noon, during quiet hour, she sat at Daniel's doorway pretending to sort toys into baskets. Slowly, she waved her hand across the sunlight streaming through the window. A shadow stretched across the floor, crawling from slow to slower. Daniel didn't turn his head, but his eyelids twitched faintly, so faintly she nearly doubted herself. She tried again, moving her hand even slower. His pupils flickered in response, just a fraction, as though something deep inside was waking up. Evelyn froze for 3 long breaths, afraid to break the moment. Then carefully she repeated the movement, this time side to side. Daniel's eyes shifted ever so slightly, following the shadow. It wasn't strong, it wasn't certain, but it was real. She swallowed the urge to gasp. She logged the details in her notebook. 12:55, hand shadow, eyelid flicker, slight pupil shift. Later, while dusting Daniel's bathroom, she found something hidden on a top shelf behind neatly folded towels, a small wooden box. She pulled it down and opened it. Inside were several vials of eye drops, their labels yellowed with age. The doctor's name, Adrian Monroe, printed clearly. The instructions read daily dosage, but no diagnosis. Some bottles were nearly empty, others untouched. A folded renewal slip at the bottom looked years old. Evelyn stood there frozen. She didn't read the paper aloud. She simply counted the vials, 1, 2, 3, 8. She placed everything back exactly as it was, aligning the labels, flattening the towels. But the faint chemical scent clung to her fingertips long after. That afternoon, as Daniel sat again by the window, Evelyn's phone screen lit suddenly in her pocket. The glow crossed his face for a moment. Instantly his eyelids snapped shut. Evelyn's heart jumped. No footsteps, no sound, only light had caused the reaction. She tried again, moving the screen carefully across his eye level. His gaze shifted, uneven but present, like a violin string pulled just tight enough to vibrate. She wrote quickly in her notebook, reaction to direct light, inconsistent but repeatable. That night, she opened her old laptop in her small staff room. She searched the word she had read on the vials, cyclopentolate, long-term use in children. The results stunned her. Article after article repeated the warning, not recommended for continuous use in young children. Can suppress natural light reflexes. Causes prolonged dilation. Her mind rushed. Suppress light reflex. Suppress. Suppress. She thought of Daniel, of the eye drops given every morning, of the way his responses weakened after each dose. She typed a quick message to Sophia Reyes, an old friend from nursing school, now training in ophthalmology. Sophie, I need your help. I've seen a child respond to light, but he's been prescribed drops for years. Can you check this? The reply came almost instantly. Meet me the day after tomorrow, 10 a.m., cafe across from the hospital. Bring a vial. Evelyn leaned back against the wall, heart pounding. If she was wrong, she was interfering where she shouldn't. If she was right, then Daniel's life had been stolen from him drop by drop. The next morning the routine repeated. 7:45, tray on the counter. 8 o'clock, Mrs. Collins carried it in. 8:05, cap clicked. 8:06, calendar marked. Evelyn folded laundry nearby, eyes lowered but ears sharp. Later she tested light again. No response. She wrote carefully in her notes. 40 minutes after drops, reaction absent. She didn't yet write suppressed. She wasn't ready to accuse without proof. That night she sat on the doorway step and whispered softly, "Daniel." He didn't answer, but for 1 second he lifted his head. She extended her hand. Slowly his fingers reached hers again. This time he didn't pull back. He held her hand lightly, steady, as though asking silently, "Don't leave." Her phone vibrated on the desk beside her, its glow sliding across the wood. "See you at 10. Don't touch dosage without a doctor. Be careful." It was Sophia. Evelyn nodded to herself. She had no plan to interfere with the medicine, not yet. Her only plan was to touch the light at the right time, one variable at a time, until the truth revealed itself. Outside the lake was still, dark as glass. Inside, a boy's small breaths were enough to tell her she was still on the right path. Not toward a miracle but toward something real. And the silence of the mansion, once so heavy, now carried the faintest thread of possibility. The 8th night of Evelyn's trial came quietly. The mansion seemed asleep, but she couldn't rest. She had been thinking of Daniel's eyelid flickers, his tiny head tilts, the way his eyes shifted toward her phone's glow. It wasn't chance. There was a pattern. But she needed to know for sure. That afternoon, on her way back from the market, she stopped at a small convenience store. Among the rows of batteries and light bulbs, she picked up a simple white flashlight. Nothing special, moderate power, narrow beam. Back in her room she practiced with it first. She aimed it at the mirror, covered part of the lens with paper to soften the light, angled it up and down, side to side. She jotted parameters on a sticky note. Slow approach, low angle, no direct strike into the pupil. When the house finally fell silent that night, she carried the flashlight to Daniel's doorway. He sat on the rug, cross-legged, teddy bear resting against his stomach, face angled toward the window. The dim night light cast only the faintest glow. Evelyn drew a steady breath. "Daniel," she said softly, "I'm going to shine a small light. If it bothers you, lift your hand and I'll stop immediately." There was no answer, but she wasn't expecting one. She turned on the flashlight, keeping the beam low at first, then raising it slowly until it brushed the corner of his eye. His eyelids flinched. Evelyn counted to 3, then lowered the light. "Daniel, can you feel it?" she whispered. He tilted his head just slightly toward the beam. Her heart raced. She tried again, moving the light gently, swaying it as though it were a firefly in the dark. His eyes shifted. Small, uneven movements, but movements nonetheless. Her hands trembled, but she kept the beam steady. She turned it off, set it aside, and sat down across from him. "Do you want to try again?" she asked quietly. He didn't shake his head, didn't turn away. To Evelyn that was permission. She turned the light back on, this time casting the shadow of her hand into the beam before it touched him. The shadow swept across his cheek. His eyes didn't follow the shadow. They followed the light itself. For Evelyn, that was the proof she had been waiting for. Her chest tightened. He's responding. He is really responding. But before she could record more, a sharp voice cut through the room. "What are you doing with my son?" Evelyn's heart dropped. William stood in the doorway, his collar loose, his face flushed with anger and fear. He strode forward and yanked the flashlight from her hand. "You're experimenting on him?" His voice shook not just with fury but with years of helplessness, guilt, and grief breaking loose all at once. Evelyn raised her hands slowly, palms open. I only used a small light, moved carefully to see if there was any response. If he was uncomfortable, I would have stopped. She never finished her sentence. Because something happened then that neither of them expected. Daniel moved. Not cautiously, not with his usual hesitant steps, but with sudden certainty. He stood, walked straight toward Evelyn and wrapped his arms tightly around her waist. He clung to her like a child clutching the shore after being caught in a wave. The room froze. William's mouth fell open. He had never seen his son move like this, not toward him, not toward anyone. This was no accident. This was choice. Daniel? William's voice cracked. The boy pressed his chin against Evelyn's apron, breathing heavily. Then with a voice halting and rough, words broke free. I see a light. Evelyn's eyes blurred, but she stayed still, steady for him. Daniel tilted his face upward, toward the spot where the beam had been. Then he whispered another word, fragile as glass. Mommy. The silence in the room stretched so long it felt endless. Evelyn placed her hand gently on his back, not to explain, not to correct, but simply to be there. William staggered a step back, flashlight still clutched in his hand. His throat worked as though forcing down years of disbelief. Finally his voice dropped, almost to a whisper. Stop the drops. Now. No one argued. The next morning, for the first time in Daniel's life, 7:45 passed without Rosa placing the tray. 8 o'clock came and went, and Mrs. Collins did not enter with the vial. At 8:06 the calendar box remained empty. The silence in the mansion was different that day, not the suffocating silence of avoidance, but the heavy silence of expectation. Everyone waited. Day 1 without the drops, nothing obvious. Daniel sat as usual, still and quiet. Evelyn didn't despair. She had learned to look for small things. Day 2 she opened the curtain 1/3. His head turned toward the light and held there longer than before. Day 3 she tested with simple cards she had drawn in thick black marker. A circle, a square, a triangle. She didn't prompt, didn't pressure. She simply held them in front of him. Daniel looked for a long while, then pointed to the circle. Evelyn nearly gasped but stopped herself. She only wrote it down. William, standing in the doorway, whispered, "He chose." His voice cracked between a question and a statement. "Yes," Evelyn said, steady as ever. "He chose." That afternoon she set 3 toys on the carpet. A soft ball, a toy car, and a rubber duck. She nudged the duck just enough for it to squeak. Daniel's lips curled into the faintest smile. His first real smile. He reached out and touched the duck. William exhaled sharply, like a man breaking the surface of water after being underwater too long. That night, instead of sitting across the room, he sat beside his son on the couch. He pulled out a leather photo album covered in dust. "Do you want to see pictures?" he asked, voice trembling. Daniel didn't answer with words but leaned toward the book. William opened to a photo of a woman in a red dress standing in the orchard. His voice wavered. "Who is she?" Daniel squinted, brows furrowed. His fingertips slid slowly to the hem of the dress. "Red," he whispered. William turned away for a moment, a tear caught on his lashes. Evelyn said nothing, only placed a box of crayons in front of Daniel. He reached in, pulled out the yellow crayon and drew a wavering line across the paper. Not neat, not perfect, but it was real. "Beautiful," William said softly, as though making a promise to his son, and perhaps to himself. And for the first time the Harrington mansion no longer felt like a tomb. It felt like a house holding its breath, waiting for light to flood in. The 5th morning without the eye drops carried a quiet tension. The staff moved softly as they always had, but every step seemed to echo louder than usual. Something had shifted in the Harrington household, though no one dared to name it. Evelyn rose early. She had prepared 3 high-contrast boards the night before, a white background with thick black shapes, a circle, a square, and a triangle. She taped them to the wall opposite the window, exactly at Daniel's eye level when seated. The sun crept in slowly, casting ripples of light across the floor. Evelyn counted silently to 10. Circle. she said in a calm voice. Square. Triangle. No coaxing, no pleading. Daniel lifted his gaze. His eyes lingered on the circle as if the shape demanded less effort to follow. Evelyn lowered her voice. If you want to speak, you can touch. He stepped forward cautiously and placed his hand on the circle. His palm traced its curve, round and complete, like a child discovering his first letter. From the doorway, William watched, hands buried in his pockets. He fought the urge to move closer, to interfere, to push. Instead, he forced himself to copy Evelyn's patience. At lunch, Evelyn set 3 objects on the table: the same soft ball, toy car, and rubber duck. She nudged the duck so it squeaked. Daniel grinned, this time with more certainty, and pointed to it. Then he looked at Evelyn as if asking her to see what he saw. That gaze carried weight. It wasn't random. It had direction. It was shared. William exhaled heavily, almost a laugh, almost a sob. For the first time in years, he felt as though he was no longer standing alone in a locked room. That evening, Evelyn pulled out a box of crayons. Choose a color, Daniel, she said. Without hesitation, his hand reached for yellow. He pressed the crayon against the paper and dragged it across, leaving a shaky line of brightness. Beautiful, William murmured, barely able to contain himself. Daniel drew another line, steadier than the first. Evelyn didn't correct him, didn't guide his hand. She simply shifted the paper nearer or farther, watching how his pupils adjusted. In her notebook, she recorded each flicker, each tilt, each change. Her notes were growing longer by the day. The next afternoon, she introduced a small game. She tied a thread to a white foam ball and let it swing slowly in front of the dark wall. The ball moved gently back and forth, its path narrow. Daniel's eyes tracked it first, then his body shifted. A small step, then another. He followed it. Evelyn moved it the other way. He adjusted. No rush, no pressure. Each step was like laying a stone on a brand new path. By evening, William sat across from Evelyn at the kitchen table, his expression uncertain. Tomorrow we get him checked, he said. She looked at him carefully. With someone not connected to Dr. Monroe. Yes, William replied firmly. The following morning, the family car stopped in front of a small pediatric clinic. The doctor, Dr. Patel, greeted them with warmth. His salt and pepper hair and calm tone carried none of the arrogance Evelyn had grown used to from specialists. He didn't speak first to William. He crouched down to Daniel's level. Hello, Daniel. I'll explain everything I do so you'll know what's coming. For the next hour, Dr. Patel tested with contrast charts, moving figures, slit lamps. He explained each step in simple words. Evelyn stayed close, notebook in hand. William sat silently, watching every movement as if his life depended on it. The results weren't perfect, but they were real. Dr. Patel concluded that Daniel had partial functional vision. His sight wasn't clear, but he responded to light, dark contrast, and slow movement. With proper stimulation and safe routines, his brain could learn to process visual input better over time. He didn't promise normal sight. But he gave something William hadn't heard in years, a plan. 30 to 45 minutes a day of tracking exercises, Patel explained. Start with high-contrast objects, then gradually shift to neutral tones. Document every change no matter how small. And above all, don't rush. The brain learns slowly, but it learns. On the ride home, Daniel pointed out the car window. Light, he said softly, then curled back into his seat. The word didn't sound like a trapped whisper anymore. It sounded like a voice carrying out through an open window. That night, Evelyn sat at the dining table drafting a light practice schedule. Morning, 10 minutes at the east window with 1/3 curtain open. Noon, shape cards. Afternoon, yellow and blue objects. Evening, flashlight beam filtered through paper. She wrote each step carefully, marking when to stop if Daniel tensed. William leaned over and signed his name at the bottom as if sealing an agreement. For the first time, he wasn't only a grieving father. He was part of the experiment. The house adjusted. Rosa started cooking a little earlier so mealtimes wouldn't interfere with practice. Mark delayed mowing to keep noise down. Even Mrs. Collins, stiff as ever, stepped softly during practice hours. The entire mansion bent its routine for one child. That night, William brought out the old album again. He turned to the page with the woman in the red dress. "Do you remember her?" His voice trembled. Daniel traced the dress with his finger and whispered, "Red." This time the word came out fuller, clearer, as though it had found its rightful place. William didn't cry. He only stayed very still, as though afraid to disturb the moment. Evelyn didn't clap or call it a miracle. She simply slid another yellow crayon in front of Daniel. He drew another streak across fresh paper, steady and bright. For the first time in years, the Harrington mansion felt like it had a heartbeat again. But in the back of Evelyn's mind, the question wouldn't rest. Those vials of drops hidden on the shelf, what exactly had they done to this boy? She knew she would have to find out. By the middle of the second week without the drops, Daniel's responses were unmistakable. His head no longer tilted just slightly, he turned with purpose. His fingers reached for toys, not only by touch but guided by flickers of light and shadow. Every day, Evelyn added to her notebook. Dates, times, reactions, repetitions. She kept her words calm, her notes exact. But behind her steady face, questions burned hotter. Those bottles, tucked away behind towels in Daniel's bathroom, why had they been given every single day for so many years? Why had no one questioned? One Wednesday morning, while the household bustled with a delivery and Mrs. Collins was busy managing a florist arrangement, Evelyn slipped into Daniel's bathroom. She lifted the towels carefully, just as she had before, and took out one of the half-used vials. She snapped a photo of the arrangement so she could replace everything precisely. The bottle was cool against her palm. She slid it into a small zip bag, tucked it deep inside her apron pocket, and returned the rest exactly as she had found them. Her heart pounded as though she had stolen something forbidden. But she reminded herself, she wasn't taking it for herself. She was taking it for Daniel. 2 days later, Evelyn met Sophia Reyes at a small cafe across from the hospital. Sophia arrived in her white coat, her hair neatly tied, her eyes sharp with the mix of exhaustion and conviction common in young doctors. She didn't waste time. "Let me see it," she said briskly. Evelyn slid the vial across the table. Sophia turned it in her hands, her brow furrowing as she read the label. Cyclopentolate. But this concentration. She stopped, shaking her head. Not standard. Not for long-term use in a child. Evelyn's chest tightened. Could it suppress his reaction to light? Sophia's face hardened. Yes, that's exactly what it does. It dilates the pupil, reduces reflexes. A child on this every day for years would appear almost completely unresponsive to light. And the additives here, they're not part of the usual formula. This isn't just careless prescribing, Evelyn. This looks deliberate. The word struck like iron. Deliberate. Not a mistake. Evelyn leaned forward, gripping the edge of the table. Are you saying, he may never have been blind at all? Sophia chose her words carefully. His vision is impaired, yes. But from what you've told me about his reactions, he always had partial sight. These drops, at this strength for this long, they suppressed what he had. They didn't treat him. They silenced him. Evelyn's throat went dry. She thought of Daniel sitting by the window year after year, eyes open but unfocused, locked in silence. She thought of William clinging to the faintest head tilts, believing there was nothing more. And all that time, a bottle on a tray was closing the boy's world further each day. Sophia scribbled notes on a pad. I'll run a full analysis in the lab. You'll have a printed report in 48 hours. But Evelyn, this isn't an error. This matches a pattern I've seen whispers about. Other children, other lawsuits. Settled quietly. All tied to Monroe. The name hung between them like a shadow. Back at the mansion that night, Evelyn laid the report folder on William's desk. He opened it slowly, scanning each line. His lips pressed together tighter and tighter. At Monroe's name, he shoved back from the desk, walked to the window, and pressed his hand against the glass as though trying to erase something written across his life. He told me my son's optic nerve was below standard, William said, voice rough. He told me there was no retinal response. He told me to accept it. Evelyn didn't offer comfort. She simply slid page 2 closer to him, the pediatric warning section. Not for long-term use. Risk of suppressing reflexes. Potential harm to developing visual pathways. William sank back into his chair, nodding slowly. His hands shook. For years he had been buried in grief, in guilt, in silence. And now rage. We need proof, he said at last. Not just for us, for everyone. The next morning, William made a call to Dana Brooks, a journalist he had once trusted during his agricultural projects. Dana was known for being cautious, thorough, never chasing cheap headlines. Within a day, she arrived at the mansion with a portable scanner. For 3 hours, she digitized files, dosing logs, old reports, and Evelyn's notebooks. No promises, Dana said calmly. But if there's a pattern, we'll find it. 2 things matter: independent verification and repetition across cases. If others share the same story, this won't stay hidden. News traveled faster than expected. The following morning, a tabloid published an anonymous article hinting that William had ignored therapies. Another headline accused a maid of making up stories about light for attention. Evelyn skimmed the words, her jaw tightening. She didn't reply, didn't argue. She closed the screen and sat on the rug with Daniel, handing him a yellow crayon. The smear campaign might tarnish her name, but it couldn't erase the line he drew across the paper: bright, steady, undeniable. By noon, Evelyn's phone buzzed with anonymous texts. Stop. This isn't your business. Another, you'll regret this. She took screenshots and sent them to William and Dana. William's reply was short: we log it. Dana traced the messages, hitting encrypted servers. Whoever is behind this is scared, she told Evelyn. And that means we're on the right track. The storm outside was building, but inside the Harrington estate, the rhythm continued. Morning curtains. Afternoon cards. Evening flashlight. Each day, Daniel tracked shadows with more stability, recognized shapes on more complex backgrounds, and spoke new words: car, duck, dad. One night, he nudged William's sleeve and whispered, Dad, look. His finger pointed at a yellow streak he had drawn. William bent low, not to correct, not to teach, but to follow. For the first time in his life, he was not dragging his son forward. He was walking beside him. But the fight ahead would demand more than patience. It would demand courage. Evelyn knew that what they had uncovered in one small wooden box was bigger than one boy, bigger than one family. Monroe's name was only the beginning. And as she tucked Daniel into bed that night, she whispered to herself the promise she had been carrying all along: one variable at a time. One truth at a time. Until the light is impossible to deny. The first ripples began quietly. A single article appeared in a small medical journal, tucked away in a column that most people never read. Concerns raised over off-label pediatric prescriptions. Buried inside was a single line mentioning Dr. Adrian Monroe. Evelyn clipped it, slid it into her notebook, and underlined the date. But silence doesn't last long when the truth is pushing through. Within days, Dana Brooks called William. Her voice was calm, but beneath it, Evelyn heard urgency. 2 families have reached out. Both had children under Monroe's care. Both were prescribed the same drops. Both were told blindness was permanent. William sat at the dining table, elbows on the wood, hands gripping his temples. And Dana hesitated. One child passed away. Not from the drops directly, but from complications during surgery that was never necessary. The other is alive. And her mother is ready to talk. Silence filled the room. Evelyn set her notebook down, looking at William. He nodded once, sharp and heavy. Arrange it. The next afternoon, a woman named Carla Rodriguez arrived with her daughter, Marisol. The girl was 9 with thick glasses and a shy smile. Carla held a folder stuffed with reports and pharmacy slips. Her voice trembled as she spoke. They told me she would never see. They gave us these drops, every single day. And when I asked about side effects, he said, better blindness than pain. Carla's hands shook. But my daughter was never fully blind. She always reached for the light. I thought I was imagining it. He made me doubt my own child. Marisol looked up shyly, then tugged at Evelyn's sleeve. Can I see Daniel? Evelyn led her to the playroom. Daniel sat cross-legged, crayons scattered around him. Marisol sat across from him and placed a red crayon on the carpet. "Do you see this?" she asked. Daniel blinked, then reached out and picked it up. His fingers closed around it confidently. He smiled faintly and whispered, "Red." Carla's sob broke the air. William turned away, pressing his palm to his mouth. Evelyn stayed steady, writing in her notebook. Shared response, cross-validation, witness present. That evening, William sat at his desk, the weight of years pressing down. How many more, Evelyn? How many children lost their sight, or their chance because of this man? Evelyn didn't answer. She only set another report folder beside him. Enough to make silence impossible. The storm grew quickly. By the end of the week, 3 more families came forward, each with the same story. Monroe, the drops, the same reassurances, the same erasure of a child's chance. Dana began compiling a dossier page by page, name by name. But for every truth that surfaced, resistance struck back harder. An online headline appeared, "Wealthy Father Exploits Son's Condition for Sympathy." Another, "Housemaid's Fantasies Create False Hope." The articles were unsigned, published on cheap outlets, but they spread fast enough to sting. Evelyn read them once, then closed the screen. She didn't let Daniel see the worry in her eyes. She bent down and whispered, "We keep going." Still, the tension in the house deepened. Rosa worried aloud about safety. Mark double-checked locks at night. Even Mrs. Collins, usually stone-faced, asked Evelyn quietly, "Are you certain this is safe?" Evelyn answered firmly, "Truth is never safe. But it's necessary." Late one evening, after Daniel had gone to bed, William and Evelyn sat in the study with Dana. "They'll try to silence us," Dana warned. "You need to decide if you're ready for what comes next. If we file publicly, this won't stay a quiet case. It will hit courts, headlines, shareholders. They will drag your name through the mud." William didn't hesitate. "Drag me through the mud. But not my son. Not the other children." Dana nodded, scribbling notes. "Then we gather affidavits. We build the case. And we make it undeniable." Over the next week, Evelyn balanced 2 worlds. By day she continued the rhythm with Daniel, shapes, colors, tracking games. His vocabulary grew slowly, car, ball, Sunday daddy, yellow. Each new word was a victory, each reaction proof that the light inside him had never been gone. By night, she sat with William and Dana, reviewing files, highlighting inconsistencies, cross-referencing dates. The vials she had photographed matched the batch numbers from Carla's pharmacy slips. The same handwriting signed the prescriptions. Patterns repeated like echoes. But threats grew sharper. An unmarked envelope appeared at the gate with a single note: "Stop before you regret it." The next morning, the florist delivered the wrong flowers, black lilies instead of white roses. Rosa nearly dropped the vase, her face pale. Evelyn slipped both incidents into her notebook. "They're nervous," she said quietly. "That means we're close." One evening, as William walked Daniel to bed, the boy tugged at his father's sleeve. "Daddy, why sad?" William froze. It was the first time his son had asked about someone else's feelings. His throat tightened. He knelt and kissed Daniel's forehead. "Not sad, my boy. Just fighting." Daniel nodded, though he couldn't yet understand the full weight of those words. But Evelyn did. She stood in the doorway watching father and son together, and felt the resolve harden inside her. This wasn't only about one child anymore. It was about dozens, perhaps hundreds, whose futures had been dimmed not by blindness, but by greed and betrayal. The Harrington estate, once a place of silence and sorrow, had become the center of a storm. But in the heart of that storm was a boy holding a yellow crayon, drawing lines across paper, teaching everyone around him what truth looked like when it finally broke through the dark. The air around the Harrington estate had changed. The silence was no longer the heavy silence of grief, but the sharp quiet of waiting, like the pause before thunder. Every knock on the gate made Rosa tense, every phone call made William stiffen. The truth was inching closer to daylight, and those who wanted it buried were tightening their grip. Evelyn noticed it first in the little things. A delivery man lingered too long at the side door, eyes roaming the hall as if searching for something. A black car parked across the street for hours, its windows tinted too dark to see inside. Anonymous messages lit up her phone at night. Walk away while you still can. This fight isn't yours. She didn't show them to Daniel, of course. But William saw the strain in her face. One night as they reviewed files in the study, he said quietly, "They're trying to scare you." Evelyn met his eyes, steady. "I grew up where fear was daily. This is nothing compared to what Daniel has faced. If he doesn't get to quit, neither do I." William said nothing more, but for the first time, he reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. It was not a gesture of command or gratitude, it was solidarity. Meanwhile, Dana Brooks moved faster than ever. She had gathered sworn statements from 4 families now, each story echoing the same pattern. Monroe, the drops, the silence, the years stolen. The dossier was thick, undeniable. But Monroe wasn't sitting still. A glossy article appeared in a national paper portraying him as a pioneer who had sacrificed everything to treat the hopeless. Photos of him with smiling children, none of whom were his actual patients, splashed across the page. The headline cut sharp, "Doctor maligned by wealthy father and his maid." The word maid stung Evelyn, but she refused to let her face show it. Daniel, sitting beside her, held up a yellow crayon proudly. "Look," he said, drawing a jagged sun across the paper. His little voice was brighter than any headline. That night, William paced the length of his study, the article crumpled in his fist. "Enough of this. Enough whispers, enough half measures. Tomorrow I call the press myself. They won't hear this from tabloids. They'll hear it from me." Evelyn stayed calm. "Once you do, there's no going back." William stopped pacing, his eyes blazing with something Evelyn hadn't seen in years. Not just anger, but purpose. "Good. That's the point." The following morning, cameras lined the Harrington gates for the first time in over a decade. William stood tall, Daniel's hand in his. Evelyn remained close, not in the spotlight, but steady at Daniel's side. "My son was not born into darkness," William began, his voice clear, carried by microphones. "He was placed in it by deliberate, repeated prescriptions that suppressed what little vision he had. He was told to accept silence, while those responsible profited." Gasps and camera flashes rippled through the crowd. Daniel pressed closer to Evelyn's leg, but she crouched beside him, whispering, "You're safe. Just hold your crayon tight." William continued, "We are not alone. Already, other families have come forward with the same story. And we will not stop until every truth is known and every child who was silenced receives justice." Questions flew sharp and fast. "Are you accusing Dr. Adrian Monroe of malpractice? Do you have proof? Why now after so many years?" William lifted a thick folder, Dana's dossier. "Proof is here. More is coming. And if it takes everything I have, I will see it through." That evening the estate felt like a fortress under siege. Reporters lingered outside the gates. Letters poured in, some supportive, some cruel. Rosa taped up the windows for privacy. Mark walked the grounds twice each night with a flashlight. Even Mrs. Collins, who had always stayed distant, began bringing tea to Evelyn's room after Daniel's bedtime, quietly leaving it on the table without a word. But inside those walls life carried on. Daniel's progress was impossible to hide now. He pointed to shapes with more certainty, recognized colors more quickly, and even drew rough pictures of a house, a tree, and the sun. Each stroke of crayon felt like defiance against the lies that had bound him. One evening, Evelyn sat with Daniel by the window. He leaned close, squinting at the moon. "Round?" he whispered. "Yes," Evelyn replied softly, her chest tightening with pride. "Round." Behind them, William stood silently, his hand pressed over his mouth. He turned away before they could see the tears brimming in his eyes. But progress wasn't the only thing growing. The backlash turned harsher. A rock was thrown against the outer wall one night, shattering a garden lamp. Evelyn found a threatening note shoved under her door the next morning. "Maids don't win wars. Walk away." She folded the note and slipped it into her notebook, adding it to the growing stack of evidence. She didn't show fear, not even when her hands trembled slightly as she turned the page. At dinner, William noticed her silence. "Are you all right?" Evelyn looked across the table where Daniel was busy stacking blocks into a shaky tower. "I'm fine," she said. Then she added, more firmly, "We don't stop." The Harrington mansion, once quiet as a tomb, had become a battlefield, not of weapons but of truth against power, silence against voice. And in the center of it all was a boy with a yellow crayon, drawing suns and circles, teaching everyone around him what light really meant. Evelyn knew the fight was about to get uglier. Monroe wouldn't back down. Those invested in his silence wouldn't either. But she also knew something else. The truth was no longer locked away in dusty files. It was alive now, spoken in children's voices, written in Daniel's crayons. And once truth starts breathing, it doesn't die easily. 9. The courthouse steps were crowded long before the Harrington car arrived. Reporters clustered with cameras raised, microphones outstretched, their voices blending into a wall of noise. William gripped Daniel's small hand tightly as they walked toward the entrance. Evelyn walked on the other side, steady and calm, shielding the boy from the chaos. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Families who had suffered under Monroe's care filled the benches, some clutching folders, others clutching photographs of children gone too soon. The weight of their presence pressed against every wall. At the front, Dr. Adrian Monroe sat flanked by his attorneys, his silver hair neatly combed, his suit pressed. He wore the mask of a man confident in his authority, but his eyes flickered uneasily when they landed on Evelyn. She returned his gaze without flinching. The proceedings began. Lawyers spoke in careful tones, citing statutes, regulations, medical precedents. The language was clinical, but the human stories underneath it throbbed with pain. When it was William's turn to testify, he stood tall at the witness stand. His voice was steady, but his hands tightened around the wooden railing. "For years I was told to accept that my son would never see. I believed it because I trusted my doctor. Every morning, a vial of drops was placed in front of him. Every morning I signed the chart. And every day I watched my boy sink deeper into silence. I thought I was witnessing blindness. But I was witnessing suppression." Gasps rippled through the audience. Monroe's lawyer objected, but the judge waved it aside. "Continue." William took a shaky breath. Then Evelyn came. She noticed what no one else had cared to see, the tilt of his head toward the light, the flicker of his eyelids. She tested gently, recorded every response. When the drops were stopped, his world opened. He spoke. He drew. He recognized colors. For the first time he called me Dad. His voice broke at that word. The judge's face softened slightly. Across the aisle, Monroe shifted in his seat. Next, Evelyn was called forward. She carried her small notebook, worn at the edges from weeks of careful entries. Standing at the stand, she opened it with steady hands. "Every date, every observation is here. Reactions with the drops. Reactions without. The difference is not subtle. It is unmistakable." She read from a page. Day 3 without drops. Pupil shift toward light source. Day 5. Recognition of yellow crayon. Day 7. Spoken word red. These are not coincidences. They are repetitions. And in science, repetition is proof. Monroe's lawyer rose sharply. "You are not a licensed physician. You are a housemaid. What qualifications do you have to make these claims?" Evelyn met his gaze without faltering. "I'm not a doctor. I'm not a scientist. I'm someone who observed with patience when others stopped looking. And sometimes that is the only qualification truth requires." The courtroom murmured in approval. Then Dana Brooks presented the dossier. Page after page of prescriptions, pharmacy slips, testimonies from other families. A pattern emerged so clear it could not be ignored. The same drug. The same instructions. The same suppression. Finally, Carla Rodriguez took the stand, her voice trembling but fierce. She held up a photo of Marisol as a toddler. "They told me to give her drops every day. They told me she was hopeless. But she always reached for the light. They made me believe I was imagining it. They made me doubt my own child. And now I know it wasn't me who failed her, it was them. The courtroom fell into heavy silence. Monroe was finally called. He rose slowly, adjusting his tie, his voice oily with practiced confidence. Cyclopentolate has long been used for diagnostic purposes. In rare cases, prolonged use can assist in pain reduction. My prescriptions were made with full consideration of each patient's needs. The prosecutor stepped forward. Doctor, are you aware that every major pediatric board warns against long-term daily use? Monroe hesitated, then adjusted his tie again. Guidelines are guidelines, not law. The prosecutor's voice sharpened. And are you aware that these children, your patients, lost years of potential development because of your so-called considerations? Monroe's jaw tightened. For the first time, cracks appeared in his composure. Dana leaned forward and handed over Sophia's lab report. The prosecutor read aloud, "Additives not part of standard formula. Concentration higher than approved levels. Evidence of alteration." The courtroom gasped. Monroe's lawyer objected, but the judge overruled. "Dr. Monroe," the prosecutor pressed, "why were these altered vials provided under your name?" Monroe opened his mouth, then closed it. Sweat gathered at his temples. For the first time he had no answer. From the gallery, Evelyn felt Daniel's small hand slip into hers. She looked down to see him watching, his yellow crayon clutched tightly in his other hand. He whispered, "Light." The word carried further than any testimony. Heads turned. The judge glanced toward the boy, then back to Monroe, whose face had gone pale. By the end of the day, the judge ordered an immediate investigation into Monroe's practice, his pharmaceutical ties, and the altered vials. The trial would continue, but the tide had turned. As they left the courthouse, reporters surged forward. Cameras flashed, questions rained down. William shielded his son with one arm while Evelyn guided him carefully through the crowd. "Do you think you'll win?" one shouted. William didn't stop walking, but his voice rang clear. "This isn't about winning. It's about truth. And truth is already here." That night, back at the mansion, Daniel sat on the rug with his crayons. He drew a shaky circle, then colored it yellow. He looked up at Evelyn and said softly, "Son." She smiled, tears threatening to fall. "Yes, Daniel. The sun." The world outside was bracing for a battle of lawyers and headlines. But inside the walls of the Harrington home, the victory had already begun. The days following the courtroom hearing felt like standing on a fault line. Every hour, something shifted, sometimes small, sometimes shattering. The Harrington mansion was no longer just a home. It had become the center of a storm raging across newspapers, television screens, and online headlines. The front gates were crowded daily with cameras and microphones. Supporters left notes and flowers taped to the iron bars. Critics left scrawled insults. One morning, Rosa found a dead crow pinned to the gate with a nail. She dropped the basket she was carrying, her face pale as chalk. "They want fear," Evelyn said as she carried the bird away wrapped in cloth. Her voice was calm, but her hands trembled after she threw it into the fire pit. Inside, the staff moved more carefully. Mark checked locks 3 times a night. Mrs. Collins began leaving lights on in the hallways after dark. Even Rosa, usually so steady, jumped at every phone ring. But through it all, Daniel's rhythm with Evelyn never broke. Morning curtain, afternoon shapes, evening crayon. The storm could howl outside, but in those moments the boy's world still held light. The investigation deepened. Dana Brooks released part of the dossier publicly, careful to keep the strongest evidence sealed until trial. More families came forward, some in whispers, some openly. Their stories painted the same picture. Monroe had built a career not on healing but on silencing. But Monroe was not alone. His allies struck back hard. A glossy magazine ran a full-page article calling William a bitter widower clinging to conspiracy. A talk show host mocked Evelyn as a Maid-playing scientist. Online trolls swarmed with threats, calling her a liar, a fraud, a thief. One night, Evelyn's phone buzzed with a new message. "Leave the Harringtons or you'll never make it home again." She showed it to William at once. His jaw tightened. "They're escalating." Dana traced the message to an anonymous server routed overseas. "This isn't random," she said grimly. "This is coordinated. Someone powerful is protecting Monroe." The pressure mounted in court too. Monroe's lawyers filed motions to discredit Evelyn's notes, calling them amateur scribbles. They questioned Carla Rodriguez's testimony, hinting she had been coached. They even suggested William's grief made him unstable. But every time they tried to twist the story, something cut through their noise: Daniel himself. On the 12th day of trial, William brought his son to the witness bench, not to speak formally, but to sit quietly with crayons in hand while testimony unfolded. As lawyers argued over data, Daniel drew a bright yellow sun and held it up. The gallery fell silent. Cameras clicked. For the first time, the world saw what Monroe's drops had stolen: not blindness but brightness. That image hit the front page the next morning. The boy who sees the sun. Support flooded in: letters from parents, donations to support the families, even statements from medical boards demanding deeper review of Monroe's practices. But the backlash turned darker too. That night, a brick smashed through one of the mansion's windows. The glass showered across the floor near the dining table. Daniel screamed and clutched Evelyn's arm, trembling. William stormed outside, but the street was already empty. Only the brick remained, with a note tied around it: "Truth destroys families. Walk away." Evelyn held Daniel close, rocking him until he calmed. Later, as William paced the hall with rage burning in his eyes, she whispered, "They're trying to break us where it hurts most, through him. But they don't understand. He is our strength, not our weakness." The following morning, William gave a short statement to the press. His voice was steel. "You can throw stones. You can spread lies. But you cannot erase what my son has seen. The truth will outlast every attack." The fight grew fiercer. Financial donors began cutting ties with Monroe's foundation. A pharmaceutical company issued a statement distancing itself from his research. Yet his loyalists doubled down, accusing William of exploiting Daniel, calling Evelyn a fraud. Through it all, Evelyn kept the rhythm. One evening, she placed a small candle on the table, lighting it softly. Daniel leaned close, eyes wide, and whispered, "Fire." It was the first time he had ever named light itself. Evelyn smiled, her chest aching with pride. "Yes, Daniel. Fire." William watched from the doorway. For a moment, the world outside disappeared. No threats, no headlines, no enemies. Just his son naming what he had always been denied. That night, Evelyn added one line to her notebook: "The brighter the truth, the darker the shadow that tries to block it." But light does not vanish. The Harrington mansion was under siege, yes. But inside, the fire of truth was burning brighter than ever. And Evelyn knew, no matter how ugly the fight became, there was no turning back. The courthouse was more crowded than ever on the morning of the final hearing. Families filled the benches, journalists packed the aisles, and cameras waited outside like vultures circling the end of a long hunt. The air was thick with anticipation. Everyone knew something irreversible was about to happen. Monroe sat at the defense table, his once flawless composure cracked. His suit was still pressed, his hair still perfect, but his eyes betrayed him. They darted restlessly across the room, landing everywhere except on the families seated behind William. Evelyn sat beside Daniel in the front row, her notebook resting on her lap. Daniel leaned against her shoulder, crayons clutched in his hand, whispering softly to himself as he drew. He was calmer now, no longer afraid of the crowd. In his small world, there was only paper, color, and light. The judge entered and silence fell heavy. The final evidence had been submitted the night before: Sophia's complete lab analysis, proving without doubt that the vials Monroe prescribed had been chemically altered. The additives were not listed in any medical guideline. Their only purpose: long-term suppression. The prosecutor rose. His voice was clear, slicing through the silence. "What we have seen here is not a mistake. It is not negligence. It is a pattern, a deliberate decision to suppress children's natural abilities, to deny them the chance of growth for profit and power." Dr. Monroe told families to accept hopelessness while he built his career on their silence. He lifted Evelyn's notebook high for the court to see. And what undid that silence? Not a machine. Not a formula. But the careful, patient observation of a woman who refused to stop looking. She saw what he chose not to. And now the world sees it too. Monroe's attorney sputtered objections, but the judge waved them aside. One by one, families testified again, voices steadier this time. Carla Rodriguez, holding Marisol's hand, said firmly, "We will not be invisible anymore." Others nodded, their courage swelling as each story echoed the next. Finally, William was called. He rose slowly, carrying a single photograph of his wife, taken years ago in the orchard. His voice was rough but resolute. "This fight began with my son. But it isn't only about him anymore. It's about every child who was told they were broken when they were not. It's about every parent made to doubt what they knew in their hearts. My son called me Dad, for the first time only after the drops stopped. No parent should be robbed of that moment." Then he turned to Monroe directly. "You told me to accept the dark. But I won't. Not for him, not for anyone." The room held its breath. When it was Monroe's turn to speak, he rose slowly. His once confident voice cracked under the weight of the evidence. I acted within my professional discretion. Medicine is not perfect." But the words rang hollow. No one believed them, not the families, not the judge, not even himself. The judge's gavel struck. "Given the overwhelming evidence, I order a full suspension of Dr. Monroe's license pending permanent revocation. A criminal investigation will proceed regarding the altered prescriptions and their distribution. This court recognizes the harm inflicted on these children and their families and recommends immediate review of every case tied to Monroe's practice." The sound of the gavel reverberated through the room like thunder breaking a long storm. Monroe sank into his chair, color drained from his face. His empire, built on years of deceit, collapsed in a single ruling. But the most powerful moment came not from the judge or the lawyers or the families. It came from Daniel. As the room erupted in murmurs, Daniel stood on shaky legs, holding up his drawing. A bright yellow circle, scribbled with uneven rays. "Son," he said loudly enough for the gallery to hear. The room fell silent. Then, like a wave, applause broke out, not for William, not for Evelyn, but for the boy who had once been silenced. The boy who now named the light. Tears streamed down Carla's cheeks. Marisol clapped her small hands. William buried his face in his palm, shoulders shaking. Evelyn placed her hand gently on Daniel's back, steadying him. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, but the story had already written itself. The headlines the next morning carried his words, "The boy who sees the sun." In the weeks that followed, more families stepped forward. Investigations widened. Monroe's name became synonymous not with prestige but with betrayal. Laws were drafted to tighten pediatric prescription oversight. Medical boards reviewed old cases with fresh urgency. The Harrington mansion, once heavy with silence, now pulsed with life. The gates were no longer symbols of isolation, but of resilience. Supporters left sunflowers at the entrance, their yellow petals bright against the iron. Letters arrived from parents around the world, thanking Daniel for giving them courage. Inside, Evelyn kept the rhythm. Morning curtain. Afternoon cards. Evening crayons. Daniel's vocabulary grew, his drawings became steadier, his steps more certain. One day he pointed to the orchard outside and whispered, "Tree." Another day, "Sky." Another, "Smile." William joined those sessions now, not as a distant observer, but as a father learning alongside his son. Sometimes he cried quietly. Sometimes he laughed out loud. But always he stayed present. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the lake, Evelyn sat on the porch with Daniel curled against her side. He drew another yellow sun, this time with a blue sky around it. He looked up at her and asked softly, "Is this real?" She kissed the top of his head. "Yes, Daniel. It's real. And it always was. We just had to find it." The storm had been long, the fight brutal, the cost heavy. But light had broken through. Not as a miracle, not as magic, but as the undeniable truth of persistence, courage, and love. And in the quiet of the Harrington estate, No longer a place of sorrow but of renewal, Evelyn closed her notebook for the last time and wrote one final line. He sees the sun.